and in about a week we will put it up on our YouTube page so people who couldn't come today can watch it. We do have all of our other at lunchtime webinars on there. So we had one on birds on Wednesday, and at the end of the month we'll have one on rock pooling. But we also had 3 last year, so you'll be able to find them all on there. When it's up on YouTube, I will send round an email with the link so you can re-find the video and any of the links that we share today as well. Please could you keep your microphone muted throughout the call, and at the end of the presentation from Sarah there will be time for questions. If you have any, please put them in the chat and then we will go through them at the end. If for any reason you drop out of the call, it can happen. To get back in, all you need to do is click on the original link. So however you got to us before, just click on the same link and it will bring you back here with us. So the webinar today is all about what bats you can spot in Devon, and the presentation is being done by Sarah Butcher, who's the chair of the Devon Bat Group, and I will put the link in the chat for you. This webinar is part of Naturally Healthy May, which is a campaign that the County Council run with Active Devon. It's throughout the whole of May. It's been running for the last, I think, 8 or 9 years, and it's all about encouraging people out to connect with nature for mental and physical health. And I think now, post-COVID, lots of people really understand that message. We were all dying to go out for that small amount of time we had in lockdown. And I think we now realise how important it is. But also, it's been a bit of in Devon, a slow spring. It's been quite cold, quite wet. So now everything is growing so much. And just those experiences of getting out right now and getting that opportunity to see what's coming. And every few days, a different wildflowers kind of coming through, and we're starting to see lots more wildlife. It's a great time to go out and connect to nature. We use this term connect to nature quite a lot, and the best way that I kind of explain it to people is if you go for a walk and you take your phone with you, I will read my messages, I might call my mum, I'll do some work while going for a walk, and I won't really be aware of what I'm doing. Whereas if I leave my phone at home and go for a short walk around where I live, I start to notice, oh, I can see some different birds coming out. Oh, there's stitchworts come out in the hedgerow I haven't seen before. Oh, it's really windy today. And I start to kind of pick up on what's happening around me, and I do feel quite different when I come back compared to when I just walk around staring at my phone. So those are the different benefits that we're talking about today. So I'll stop waffling on, and I'm going to share Sarah's slides and we can get going. So bear with me for a second. Just make it full screen. And Sarah, does that look good to you?
Good to me, thank you.
Great, thank you.
Lovely, thank you, Kate. It's lovely to have this opportunity, so thank you for asking me. I actually identify completely with what you were saying last night, yesterday, in that last night I ran a bat walk on Woodbury Common, and we just stood in the most beautiful sort of twilight with our torches off and just listening to the birds, and yeah, magic moment. Okay, so Kate, shall I start?
Yes, please do. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, could we turn over to the next page then, please? Lovely, thank you. So we've got about half an hour where we're going to talk about bats that you might see in Devon. We're going to start off talking about what are bats. We're going to talk about the species that we have in Devon, where they live, what they eat, how you can watch them, and key places to go in Devon, and then maybe a little bit about more information that you can find should you want to. Okay, Kate, next one, please. Thank you. So what are bats? Bats are mammals. They're warm-blooded, they've got a fur, they feed their young on milk just like we do. They're very clean animals, and they also spend hours grooming themselves. All bats in this country are insectivorous and hibernate, so that means we don't have any vampire bats or anything. You don't need to worry when you're going out for a walk. And bats have just one baby a year. What we don't often realise is that bats are very long-lived. You might think about a mouse living for just a few months, sort of 9 months on average. But bats can actually live a really long time. We know through radio tracking, or rather ringing studies, that some bats can live up to 30 years. Bats are tiny as well. For example, our most common bat in Devon, the pipistrelle, weighs about 4 grams. So that's about the same as a 20p coin. And I don't know if you can see my thumb here, but the body of a pipistrelle is just about the same length as the top two joints of my thumbs. They're absolutely tiny. Something else that people quite often think of is they think that bats are quite closely related to mice. If you think about a flea mouse, for example, but actually they're more closely related to us. So that's a bit of a misnomer, really. Thanks, Kate. So Devon is a fantastic place to live for lots and lots of reasons. But if you like bats, it's a fantastic place even more so because we are really lucky in that we've got lots and lots of different species of bats. In the UK, there are 18 bat species, and 17 of those are breeding species. There's just one species, the greater mouse-eared bat, that doesn't actually breed over here, but breeds over in France. Devon has got 16 of those species. So you can imagine, Devon Bat Group are always on the hunt to look for the mystery Alcathoe bat that we don't have. But the further north you go, the fewer bats you get, or the fewer species you get. And so Devon is very, very lucky. I'm going to talk about why in a few minutes' time. Thanks, Kate. So this here is a list of all the different bats that we know that we do have in Devon, because it's quite a long list. So we've got nocturnal liseless and serotine. They're quite big bats. We've got brown long-eared, grey long-eared, 3 different types of pipistrelle, 2 different species of horseshoe bats, and then we've got myotis bats. They're ones with white tummies, pointy trachea, and so Daubenton's, whiskered brants, Natura's, Bechstein, and then the beautiful Barberstow as well. If you look at the photo on the right hand side there, you'll see that's a colony of greater horseshoe bats that I took a photo of during a hibernation visit earlier this year. You can see how they're all cuddled together. Thanks, Kate. So what I've done to sort of divide bat species up is to put them into groups to make it a bit easier to remember them. So we've got big bats. So these are our big bats. We've got on the top left, nocturnal bats, and then greater horseshoe bats. If you look at the top right, that's a greater horseshoe hanging down from one of the East Budleigh military buildings. So if you know Woodbury Common very well, you might know there are a couple of buildings up there with bats inside. And then at the bottom left, there's another picture of a greater horseshoe, this time in somebody's hand. And then on the bottom right, you've got a picture of a serotine. So this was actually a bat that came into care and yeah, spent some time with me. It was very photogenic. Thanks, Kate. Then we've got pipistrelle bats. We've got 3 different species of pipistrelle in Devon. We've got common and soprano pipistrelle, which you see quite often. And then on the right-hand side, there's an Athesius pipistrelle. They're far less common. You don't see them very often at all. And we know that they migrate huge distances. So quite often they might be ringed. You can see this one's got a ring, and they'll turn up a few days later far along the Sussex coast or even further afield. We have had them turn up in places like Lithuania before. So we know they travel long distances. If you're interested in those, you can see them at Bystock Ponds and also along the canal or the waterfront in Exeter. Okay, next page, please. Then we've got the myotis bats. These bats all have white tummies and pointy ears. So they're quite easy to recognise, but they're not so good to listen to on a bat detector in that they all sound very similar. So if you're on a bat walk and we hear something like a myotis bat, we'll only say it's a myotis bat. We won't say which specific one it is, not unless we can be absolutely sure of what we're listening to. Next page, please. Then we've got other bats. You'll see there are 2 bats there with really long ears at the top left, bottom left. So at the top, you've got a grey long-eared. Now, Devon is very, very lucky in that we've got some maternity roosts of grey long-eared bats. They're incredibly unusual. I heard somewhere that there are thought to be about less than 5,000 individuals. I don't know how accurate that information is, but it just goes to show how very lucky we are to see any of them around here. And then at the bottom, a beautiful brown long-eared bat. On the top right hand side, you've got a Barberstow bat. Their ears meet up in the middle of their forehead. They're quite hardy bats. You see them flying around even when it's quite cold. And then the bottom right, we've got a lesser horseshoe bat. Next slide, please. And I was incredibly privileged to pick up this grey long-eared. So this actually turned up in Topsham. A colleague rang up to say her husband had got a bat stuck in his office and could I go and help. So I went over, had a look, picked it up, looked at it, thought, oh my goodness, this looks quite nice, but I am very guilty of getting a bit excited about whether I've discovered a grey long-eared. So I didn't say anything, showed it to two friends who are quite knowledgeable about bats, and their mouths just dropped open. So one, well, it's definitely a grey long-eared bat found in Topsham, so a very lucky find. I thought, yeah, I put the picture here just because I thought it was quite cute, really, and nice to see a bat close up. You can see those lovely long ears that when they're just about to take off, they inflate their ears and they go up nice and big like that. And when they're relaxed, they roll them up and tuck them under their wings. Okay, next picture, please. Thank you. So where do bats live? Well, we call the place that a bat lives a roost, and they might have their roost in different places. So some bat species like trees, some like buildings. So pipistrelles, for example, might be in the roof of your house. Quite often bats like barns and sheds. They might live in the outside parts of houses, maybe behind hanging tiles and boarding, or in cavity walls or roof spaces. Some bats particularly like their comfort, so for example ceratines, like being on chimney breasts where it's nice and warm. Then you've got other species that like living in caves or cellars. Some bats like being under bridges, and through doing lots of bat rescues I get calls out to all sorts of interesting places as well that you wouldn't expect bats to be. So for example in electricity meters or behind notice boards and things like that. But on the whole, trees and buildings seem to be the most common places to find them in. Okay, next page, please. Now, I hope this video works. I don't know if it will because we've had a few technical issues with my iPad this morning. However, this might show a brown long-eared approaching roost. You can see it was filmed by someone called Tavy who lives actually quite close to Woodbury Common. And we'll see if it will work. So this should show a bat approaching. She filmed it with her phone. So you've got a brown long-eared bat there. Has a good look around. And then scuttles into that hole. So the important thing to note is that bats can fit into the tiniest of spaces. Anywhere you can get your thumb, you can get a bat.
Really, really cute. Yeah.
Next one, please. Thank you. So as we said at the start, all bats in the UK are insectivorous. So they eat things like midges, mosquitoes, moths, beetles, maybugs, cockchafers, things like that. They need to eat a third of their body weight every night. So if it's nice and warm, as in not raining, not freezing cold, the bats will be out hunting around, especially sort of around sunset and around dawn, and maybe in the middle of the night as well. Devon is a fantastic place to see bats because we've got some lovely habitat for them. So we've got lovely hedgerows, tree lines, very appropriate for National Hedge Week. And because of the different hedgerows and the habitats we've therefore got lots of insects, and of course that's really good for the bats. So yeah, I think we go to the next page, please. And how do they find their food? Well, lots of people think that bats are blind, and they're not. They use something called echolocation to find their prey, but they also have quite good eyesight as well. So although they can't see in colour, they can see nearly as well as us. So for example, if you're using a bat detector at night, when it's first sunset, you might not hear bats flying around because they're using their eyes. However, they can use echolocation to sort of, it's a bit like sonar. They can shout through their noses or through their mouths, and the amount of time the call takes to come back to them is gives them the information they need to tell them about where things are, where their prey is, how fast it's moving, and help them navigate as well. So they're a bit hard to hear with our ears because they're ultrasound. Some people are very, very lucky and they can hear bat calls. It tends to be by the age of 13, though, that you can't hear them anymore. So we use something called a bat detector to listen to bats. So I've got some screenshots on the right-hand side from my bat detector. And I've got one of the ones that you plug into your phone and it tells you or it shows you what the call looks like. So you can look at the shape, look at the frequency. So for example, the bottom right one there, it was loudest at 27 kilohertz and we knew it was a serotyne by looking at the shape and listening to the sound it was making. So you can use a bat detector like that, or you can get something called a heterodyne bat detector. I've got some pictures on one of the pages coming up that shows you how to use them. Okay, next page, please. Basically, what the bat detectors do is they transform the ultrasound into something that we can hear or something that we can see. So I've got two pictures of bat detectors on the right-hand side. The bottom right one is the Magenta 4. That costs about £55 or so. So you can go out into your garden and you can listen to the bats and hear the calls they're making. But you don't necessarily need a bat detector. One of the best things you can do is actually just go and sit in your garden at dusk or sunset and just sit down nice and comfortably and look towards hedges or trees. So um, if you've got, for example, a hedge at the bottom of the garden, the bats may well be using that to feed over or to commute along. Also, if you know that you've got bats around, it's worth looking at your roof spaces as well. So look at your fascias and see if any bats are dropping out of that, see if they're emerging. If you do have bats in your house, then really worth keeping an eye on how many you have. So it's worth sitting there and counting them. So maybe start at sunset, count them out, and then count them at different times of the year as well. So lots of bats will actually move around different roofs at different times of the year. So whereas we turn our heating up, bats would tend to move roosts. So if it gets really cold, they go to a colder roost. If it gets really warm, they go to a different one. And they may not stay on your roof very long. So it's worth counting them and then you know the maximum number that might be in there. Also worth noting the temperature as well. So that, for example, a friend of mine has got bats in her flat roof and they only turn up when it's 28 degrees. So she knows if the weather's nice and warm, they will come back and they live there for a sort of stay there for a week or so and then they disappear. So it's worth noting the temperature and then next time it's that temperature, go back and look again. And you could consider buying a bat detector as well. If you really like watching them, it's magic to hear what they sound like as well. Next page, please. So where to see them? Well, I've put in your gardens. That's the best place, especially if you like sitting there on a nice warm evening with a glass of wine or something. So watching them in your gardens is good fun. I don't have bats in my garden, unfortunately, so I have to go further afield to watch them. Churchyards seem to be really good, especially if you've got a churchyard that's being managed for wildlife, so you've got longer grass, wildflowers and things. Um, Along rivers or canals, really good places. So for example, there was a walk last week in central Exeter where we walked along the flood relief channel and had lots of bats flying along there. Along hedgerows, really good. So if you're out in the countryside, just watch a hedgerow for a little bit. One of the favourite places that bats have is, well, they really like commuting along tree-lined lanes. So if you think about a lane that's got trees or hedges on both sides, that would be a magnet for bats. It will have so many different places for them to feed. And also consider joining a bat walk as well. If you have a look at the pictures there, the left picture, there's a sort of blurry shape on the right hand side. That was a common pipistrelle flying around a street light. They particularly like the orange high pressure sodium street lights, so quite often not only can you see them more clearly because they're illuminated by the lights, but also the insects will be attracted to them and so they feed around the lights for that reason as well. Um, Something to note that they're not quite so keen on the new LED lighting, and if you have a bat wrist near you, then it's worth getting your LED light when it's upgraded to have a baffle on it, just because the bats aren't quite so keen on the bright white light. Then if you look at the right hand side, this was right in Exeter city centre last week. So you've got the church in the background. I was standing just above the catacombs and we had greater horseshoe bats and two species of pipistrelle in that photo. And a moment later we had three species of pipistrelle. So right in the city centre, you can still get some fantastic bats. Next page, please. So I've put down here a map of some interesting places that might be near you to go and look at bats. We've just talked about Exeter Quay and Canal. That's a really good place. If you go to the catacombs or Mary Archers around there, lots and lots of bat species, including really unusual greater and lesser horseshoe right in the catacombs. We know that they're roosting there all year round. Bostock Nature Reserve is really good near Exmouth. Fantastic bats there. We've got about 11 species that use that regularly. If you're near Buckfastleigh, that's an amazing place to go. So you may have seen it on something like Springwatch or something, but if you go and park in the lane down past the church, there's a turning circle at the end. If you park on one side nice and safely, there are a couple of gateways at the far side and a footpath. If you stand at one side of the footpath, either of them, you'll probably get 500 or 600 bats fly over your heads, really quite low. You don't need a bat detector. It's just a magic thing to watch. Meet up near um, Great Torrington, Hatherley. They've got fantastic water bodies. Bats really like feeding over water, so that's a really good place to go and watch bats. Um, so lovely bats there. You'll see there are a few places with circles around as well. They tend to be reservoirs. So yeah, I'm trying to think of an example, but like Otterhead Lakes, or some of the Dartmoor, Southwest Lake Trust places. They've got fantastic bats that you can see flying over the sort of trees and vegetation around the edge, and then flying over the water itself. So yeah, so just a few ideas of different places that you can look for bats if you haven't got some near you, or if you don't know that you've got some near you. Next page, please. So I thought we'd talk a little bit about the bat year because it's quite an interesting year that they have. This is taken from the Bat Conservation Trust's Amazing Bats publication, and it's just a nice graphic really. So if we start on the left-hand side of January and February, during the coldest months, bats will be hibernating. And then as soon as the temperature rises above 8 degrees at sunset, the bats will start becoming more active, so they come out and feed. So normally that would be sort of March, April time. So they come out and feed up like mad, put on lots of weight, and the females, if they're pregnant, will then start thinking about going into maternity leave about sort of May and June time. A baby bat is called a pup, and they only ever have one, or normally only ever have one a year. They might not breed every year as well. It's one of the reasons that bats are so highly protected because it takes a very long time to build up population numbers. But pups are born sort of very small. They're about the size of a 2p coin. They're a third of the mother's body weight, so they're enormous in proportion. And they become independent and flying within about 6 weeks. So they grow very quickly and become independent very quickly. Then mating, or they sort of feed up like mad, and then August to September becomes mating time. We sometimes call it swarming because you might see them flying around in groups. So they mate in September, October, but they don't actually become pregnant until the following spring. The bats start hibernating when the temperature drops down below 8 degrees at dusk, and they will hibernate, so they drop their body temperature down as much as they can, and that means that they don't use any calories, so they can sleep all through the winter, which sounds quite a good idea to me. They will wake up sometimes, but the more they wake up, the worse it is for them because waking up takes a lot of energy. So if you have bats hibernating in your roof or somewhere, it's best not to disturb them at all. Then they wake up. Oh, sorry. If we go follow that line around back to January, February, you can see they're still sleeping. And we talked about the fact they mate in September, October, but actually they only become pregnant in the spring. So it's delayed implantation. And what happens then is that if there isn't enough food around or conditions are too cold, they won't actually become pregnant at all. So this winter, for example, was very mild, and that's not good for bats. They need it to be nice and cold. So if it's very mild, it means they can't drop their body temperature down very low. They keep burning calories, and there aren't the insects for them to catch. So if that's the case, then quite often they won't become pregnant. Next page, please. So bats really need friends. So we need to protect the places where they live and they feed. Things you can do at home, you can plant scented plants that encourage insects. So anything white and scented is particularly good for insects and therefore very good for bats. Put up bat boxes. Don't be surprised if they don't appear to be used for a bit. Quite often it takes a while for the bats to either find them or for them to need them, but they will know where they are. I've got a massive bat box on the side of my house that I didn't think was being used at all, and no bat droppings or anything, no sign of activity. But I put a bat detector underneath it, and in one night I had over 300 passes, so the bats knew exactly where it was. They just weren't using it during the day, but they do know they can go to it if they need it. Another point is not to disturb any bats that might be roosting on your property or in your roof or in a tree or anything. If you do have to have any tree work done, do think quite carefully about where the bats might be using it. And also, if you ever find a bat out in daytime, or maybe your cat brings one in, please don't just sort of pop it outside, it's likely to die. If you Google "I found a bat in Devon," there's a whole network of people who can come and pick it up, get it care, get it vet help and antibiotics and things, and then hopefully get it back to you when it's fit and healthy and ready to go back where it came from. Yeah, and I've put there a link to the Devon Bat Group page, but could we go over to the next page, please? Thank you. I put down here a list of different sources of information just in case this has whetted your appetite. devonbatgroup.org, you can look at information about Devon Bat Group and things that we do. There's a fantastic resource that Bat Conservation Trust have, and that's the bats.org.uk website. If you're interested, or if you've got bats in your roof, it would be really worth taking part in one of the National Bat Monitoring Project surveys. So if you have a look at bats.org.uk and look at NBMP, there's a whole list of different surveys you can do without any experience and without a bat detector. So, for example, the roost surveys, you sit in your garden, you watch the bats coming out of your roof and let them know how many you found and what the date was. And then they use that to build a picture of the populations across the UK. There's also the Devon Bat Survey that's just literally been launched this week. So Devon Wildlife Trust have got a series of bat detectors that they can loan out to you for 3 days. You put it in your garden, and after 3 days you send it back and they will send you a report telling you what species you've got. Also have a look for bat walks as well. It's a really good way to get outside and somewhere different, look for bats, get your hands on a bat detector and see how good they are, and just be out with other people somewhere different in the night time. It's yeah, rather lovely. I had a bat walk last night and we had all sorts of different species we found as well as bats. So yeah, good fun. And then at the bottom there, I put a leaflet here, Amazing Bats. It's a really good leaflet, which gives you a bit more information about different bats, what they look like, how they fly, and plants you can put in your garden. And something I didn't put is this FSC chart, which is a Field Studies Centre publication that's got lots of pictures of what bats look like. But the really useful bit is actually on the back, and it will tell you a bit more about each species, like what frequency they use when they're echolocating on a bat detector, how they fly, their flight patterns, and a bit more about each species. Okay, I think that's me done. Thank you, Kate. And I'm sorry, everyone, you've probably been bombarded by facts and bit of a whistle-stop tour, but hopefully you can get out on the bat walk and find out more sometime soon.
Great, thank you so much. There was lots in there that I didn't know. I didn't know about bats only going to different places for a short amount of time. So that's really interesting. So is that only through the kind of summer months, or they won't move in the winter?
Yeah, so during hibernation time, they tend to stay put. There are exceptions. So there's a great saying in the bat world about bats don't read the rule books. So you think you know something, and the bats will prove you wrong. But
Yeah.
on the whole, most bats will have a hibernation roost and they stay there throughout hibernation. And then in the summer months, they move around. So, for example, pipistrelles might use 17 different roosts a year.
Wow.
Um, Other bats are much more loyal to one particular roost space. So if you've got long-eared, then they would tend to use the same roost space all year round, but just different parts of it. So they might be by the chimney at one part and by the outside wall on another part. And yeah, so they will move around. But so yeah, different bat species do behave quite differently.
Great. If anyone has any questions, we've got time for a couple. So you can either put your hand up or write it in the chat. I have put the link to the Devon Bat Group in the chat, but also Devon Wildlife Trust asked if we could share a link as well. They have 9 locations in Devon where you can go and borrow bat detectors. So that's what that link is. So they're all over the county, and I think you can get either the more traditional ones, or there's ones that you can pop into your iPad or iPhone, which I've used before, and they're really good because they show you the calls, don't they? They show the kind of hockey
Yeah.
shape of the different
Yeah,
calls, so they're
I'm not
quite
sure
good
if
as
they
well.
loan those out so much, but definitely you can borrow the SM4s, which are the big green ones that you put into your garden and find out exactly what's flown past, even when you're not there, so you don't have to be with them all the time.
So we have a quick question
Mhm.
from Amanda. If you see a bat out during the day, is this always abnormal behaviour?
Yes, so this spring has been particularly interesting in that we have had really cold, wet conditions for a long time, and bats have therefore found it very difficult to hunt. So I've had lots of reports over the last month or so of bats out in daytime. Normally, if you see a bat out in the daytime, it's either been disturbed or it's starving hungry. So I guess that's a bad sign that we've seen bats out. If you do see bats out in the daytime, I think it's something to worry about. It may be they've been disturbed from their roost, so someone might have gone up in their loft and started moving things around or something. Or it could be a sign that they're actually finding it really difficult to eat enough to keep them going.
Okay, great. Does anybody else have a question? Oh, I've got a hand up. Deborah, did you want to ask your question?
Yeah, thank you very much. Lovely talk. Thank you so much, Sarah. It's really interesting. I work for the council, and I'm also interested in the climate agenda. So thinking about making houses more insulated.
Yeah.
Also on a very personal basis, I've taken on a property with a very leaky little bungalow, and I know we have bats. We've borrowed a bat detector. And we even had Barbara Stell come past, so we were really excited about that. Yeah, we were really excited to get the report. So it's been absolutely wonderful. But we need to re-roof our house. And I wonder if there's any chance locally of contacting people to make this actually a bit of a case study. Because not only do we want to insulate and be climate savvy, but we want to be bat friendly too. And yeah, so we're obviously going to get in touch with the ecologist and do things properly. But we also need to do it urgently. So it's really quite quick. So yeah, I'm just wondering if there's really, I have looked at the websites and I can see there's some sources of information, but I just wondered if there's anything Devon specific going on around being bat friendly and also getting insulation done. So if you know anything about that, then please link in with me if you will.
Lovely, thank you. So there are a couple of things to sort of point out. I'm not aware of any projects or anything, any studies like that going on. So that's disappointing in that respect. People often think of having bats as being a hugely expensive thing that's going to cause lots of problems for them. But actually, if you're a householder and you've got bats on the roof and you want to do something like replace a fascia or you need a repair done or something, then there's a volunteer bat risk visitor scheme that's a free scheme that people can have a volunteer bat risk visitor come around, check their bats out, see where they're living, see how they're behaving, and advise, for example, about woodworm treatment and things like that. It sounds, unfortunately, if you need re-roofing, like you're going to need a bigger job, and therefore
I'm going to do the whole thing. Yeah.
But I just wanted to point out it doesn't necessarily have to be a horribly expensive, or you see the papers and the headlines, don't you, and it causes all sorts of alarm and despondency. But that sounds really nice, and to have Barbara Stells around as well is really exciting. So I'm not sure I can give a really helpful answer there, unfortunately, but do email me or something, get in touch, and if I can help, I will.
Thank you. Yeah, even a point to an ecologist who's particularly passionate would be great.
Yeah, I probably, because I know so many people and so many ecologists are Bat Group members, probably can't recommend any individuals, but I'm sure we can have a conversation.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you. It's really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for joining us this lunchtime. We're going to stop the recording now. And as I said, in the next week or so, we will put this on our